Hello, Amy here, and welcome to the Negotiation Illuminators podcast, where we shed a different perspective on negotiation. Negotiation does not have to be scary, intimidating, or something that only salespeople do. No one is born a negotiator. It is a learned skill that anyone can own. I will be inviting experienced negotiators to the show where we will be sharing their top tips, exclusive insights, and valuable lessons learned, all to help boost your confidence in negotiation. Today, we are joined by Rebecca Dykema, the SVP of Partnerships and Creative Transformations at CreativeX. She is here to share her insights and experiences on negotiation. We both worked together at Google 5 years ago now. Hello, Rebecca. Good to see you again, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy. It's fun to be here.
What is the one thing you wish someone had told your younger self about negotiation?
It's really funny because I think it's easy to be intimidated by negotiation. If you'd asked me when I was 18 or 20 or 25 or even 30 if I would be a negotiator, I would have said no. But the reality is that, and what I guess I wish I'd known back then is that your whole life is a negotiation. I've got 2 kids and 2 cats and a husband and a full-time job. The reality is that you can't escape it. You negotiate in just about every aspect of your life. I'm sure you find this too as a working mom. You get up in the morning and you have to decide what you're going to have for breakfast. My kids have ideas. My husband has ideas. He's Italian.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, between doing works in your house and navigating your neighbors to walking into work every day and figuring out what you're going to prioritize and the impact that's going to have and how people think about it, it's not necessarily negotiation, but it's all about influence. And I think those are very similar concepts.
People almost assume it's those bigger negotiations, but you're telling me you're negotiating many times before the day even starts, 9 a.m. starts.
As you navigate other people in your life, and as you go on holiday with a bunch of friends, you make decisions together, and that decision making process requires level of influence. You have strong feelings about what you want to do, the way in which you do that and how you communicate. It's all about influence and empathy. And so I think that there's a lot that you can learn in your day-to-day interactions around how you engage people in your day-to-day life and sort of translate those into bigger, more concrete negotiations that maybe you navigate at work.
What are some of the common negotiation mistakes you see people making, and how do you think they can be avoided?
Not asking for what you want as a woman, but I don't want to stereotype. I think early in your career in general, it can be intimidating just to ask for what you want. And you assume that you'll get what you deserve. And so I think asking for what you want is the first important piece of advice and mistake that I've seen a lot of people earlier in their career make. And then the next sort of level of that is not just asking for what you want, but asking for more than what you want.
Okay, yeah.
As I started to get bolder in my approach to negotiations or in my approach to asking for a raise or making an offer on a house or those types of things, I would go in at what I thought was sensible. The concept of anchoring is real. And so if what you think is sensible is here, sometimes you actually really have to sort of push above. Often you'll be surprised in that you can also get more than what you want if you ask for more. The other common mistakes that people make, we've had sort of early younger salespeople spend a lot of time negotiating or navigating a point of contact. They realize that actually that's not the decision maker. You can spend a lot of time negotiating with someone who actually isn't the one who's going to make the decision. And so making sure that you've pinpointed, are you negotiating with the right person in the first place? Are they the one who is able to make a decision?
Back to your point on anchoring, I'm recalling a conversation I had with my son last night where I said to him, 4 more mouthfuls, come on, 4 more mouthfuls. And I knew there was a little bit less than 4 more mouthfuls, but I went with that because I knew he was going to come back and say, no, 3, or no, not that many. And I'm just thinking, even in that simple application of what you're saying, I needed him to finish dinner. That was my want, me asking, but I went higher than what I was ready to agree to. And even that playful example is anchoring right there. And I think that's a great piece of advice. What do you want? And go above that.
Going into a negotiation, going into a discussion about the value of something, going into any discussion about how much dinner your son is going to finish, there's a sensible starting place. And you have the opportunity to, and can make the decision to either ask someone what your product is worth, or in a certain context, you can go in and say, this is what we believe it's worth. And that anchor is important because it sets perspective of value of whatever it is that you're bringing to the table.
What is the most creative negotiation tactic you've ever heard of or used yourself?
So I like this question a lot. What first came to mind for me was I had a conversation with an old boss, a guy I used to work with who's still at Google and sort of works in the trading space, and worked with all sorts of characters, both within the Google ecosystem and outside. I mean, he would trade with major media agencies. You think about like hard-nosed negotiators or people who work in that space, and you just assume that they're going to be like ball breakers, right? They're going to be really tough. And you come across plenty of those who are really tough characters. This guy's the sweetest guy you've ever known. Like, wonderful to work for, wonderful to work with. Everybody loves him. Which is actually, I think, in some ways, a key to success in negotiating, is not necessarily being like the hard-nosed ball breaker, but one who's quite accessible and empathetic to other people's needs. So the tactic that he had undertaken to get this particular project over the line, there was an internal stakeholder. He was working with them to sort of shape a project, was having trouble getting them to see his way. And what he was quite good at doing was rallying a coalition of people around him to support his project. And in particular, he found a character who is actually the hard-nosed ball breaker, who wasn't really involved in the work or the project itself, but he managed to sort of recruit him to his side and essentially get him to put pressure on and influence this other woman that he was working with. But in essence, it was this really interesting game of sort of carrot and stick, where he could maintain his like, super sweet, like, I'm trying my best and like, here are all the reasons why this could work. But then he created a stick that existed outside of the system to put pressure on his stakeholder to help move her in the direction he wanted. And I was like, that is ingenious. This guy was happy to help, owed him favors in other places. And so it was sort of this interesting trade of support where he could continue to play the nice guy and he could leverage others to play their own sort of role in the process. It was cool.
And did he usually use this tactic, or was this just something different that you'd seen him try?
I think that it's indicative of the fact that he was quite good at leaning on the people around him to support. It's a skill set that even like that I myself am still honing. I think building a coalition of people to support your project or position in a discussion or in a debate it's a skill. As I mentioned earlier, negotiation is a lot about influence, and it's not just about like my discussion with you, but it's about shaping the way that you see the project or the opportunity. And you might not be the only voice in that conversation. So recognizing the other voices around you in the system that can have influence is a really important part of the process. So I think that he regularly used coalitions to help move things along.
And it's a really interesting perspective, because a lot of the conversations I've been having are about one-on-one negotiations. So how can I as an individual work well with another individual? And it's then almost as you get to larger or wider negotiations, it feels a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but you've almost positioned it that it's, well, actually, as togetherness, team, coalition, it can be quite powerful once everybody is aligned, because there's that togetherness and support networks. Yeah, brilliant tactic. And I think it'll be really useful for people hearing when they do have to work with teams. It's not just about their own influence. What are the key differences between negotiating in personal versus professional contexts?
I mean, the skills that you use in one context versus another are similar, but I have always found that it's much easier to negotiate in a professional context than it is in a personal context. And the main reason for that is just that it's your money, it's your life, it's your ask, it's personal, and your ability to get what you're looking for is even more important. Now, one could argue in a professional context, maybe you're dealing with the pressures of your boss and your, the pressures of the system and the volumes of money that you're dealing with, or which obviously I don't want to suggest aren't high pressure, but I think it's actually a lot easier to follow some of the advice that I gave earlier in the chat around asking for what you want, asking for more than what you want in a professional context, because you also feel like you've got the weight of your organization behind you. Whereas personally, if it's just like me asking for a raise by myself and I have to justify my contribution, and the fear of loss of pushing too hard or asking for too much and the personal sort of implications to that are more sensitive.
Yeah, the fear of loss. And every guest that I have asked that question to has said the same thing, that personal feels bigger and more emotion. I think that you said the fear of loss is individual as well. So what do you think we can do, I guess, to people listening that are a bit more fearful of those personal negotiations? What could we say or advise?
We talked a little bit about the fact that practice is important. I try to remind myself on a pretty regular basis that if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And it takes a lot of courage and sort of an ability to really feel confident in your self-worth to go and ask for what you want. I think the other thing is that in some respects, the fear of loss is irrational. Asking for a raise that's a percentage more than what you think would potentially be on the table isn't going to do you reputational damage. And actually, one of the things that I try to remind myself of a lot is that my bosses pay me to be a good negotiator, right? Like, so if I can't negotiate
Yeah.
for myself, how can they possibly expect me to negotiate for them? And so I try to remind myself that in some ways I am demonstrating a skill set which elevates potential employers' view of my ability to contribute. And so I wouldn't like underestimate in certain moments. There's nothing to be ashamed of in going in and asking for what you think you deserve.
I often say to people when I see fear, or we talk about like limiting beliefs when I'm coaching people, what if you're in the same position in a year's time? So you don't say anything because you're fearful or nervous. That's okay. Everybody has those feelings. But in a year's time, if you don't ask, you're not going to know. You will be in the same position. Like you said, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And that sometimes helps people overcome that fear. So even just recognizing some of those traits that shows fear, or recognizing, is it irrational or is it actually based on evidence? So there's a lot of things that once you recognize this fear, I think you can try and play around and dabble and try something new.
Exactly,
Great.
for sure.
How does the negotiation process differ virtually versus face to face?
The world has changed so much from a technology standpoint, and so much happens. So much business is transacted online, over email, over chat, over video call. The great thing about virtual negotiation is that you can be very precise. It's a great environment in which you can detail specifically exactly what you want, which is very helpful. The opposite side of that virtual environment is chat, text, instant sort of messaging, which is actually the opposite. Means that you can be super quick to respond. Means that you can be connected all the time. Things can move very quickly. It also means that you can be thought less in what you say or how you communicate. And so there's a risk, obviously, in that speed of communication, that you aren't as clear, or that you don't communicate what you want, or that you don't think clearly in terms of a response to a discussion. And so there are those risks, I think, to consider on the virtual side.
What do you find yourself doing more?
It's a mix, inevitably. One thing that I would say in terms of in person is that I would really encourage people to consider, when you're sort of at a log jam, when you find that you're having difficulty sort of moving something forward, that picking up the phone or scheduling an in-person chat over coffee can make such a big difference. The best progress made in deal discussions is oftentimes in person, face to face, over the phone, where you have a chance to just kind of like let your guard down and like debrief a bit on sort of all of the context and make sure that like everyone's super clear. It helps to make it more personal.
If the word negotiation was removed from the dictionary entirely, what word would you use and why?
I would use the word influence, because ultimately, when you negotiate, you're really trying to influence someone towards your perspective of the world.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today and all of your top tips. We've got some great stuff.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
Hello, Amy here. Thank you for listening to the Negotiation Illuminators podcast. To find out more about future episodes or to receive negotiation top tips, please sign up to my newsletter. The link can be found below. Bye bye for now.